Welcome to Vibrant Publishers podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to share their insights and knowledge with our listeners. Today, we are joined by Sharon Boyce, who is an educational practitioner, consultant, a small business owner, entrepreneur, who is developing a new venture to provide the non-traditional learner, mid-career professional, military member, unique expertise, strategies, programs, tools in education and career preparation and professional development. The clarity, creative solutions, and sustainable accomplishments that further create and enhance value to their own personal mission. Sherry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me. I greatly appreciate it.
So, today's topic is creative problem solving and whole brain thinking. Could you give an overview of these two topics to our audience?
Yes. Firstly, I would like to say that you may have people have a lot of difficulty distinguishing between creativity and innovation. So I just want to be clear that creativity is the unique kind of start or creation of something new and different, and innovation is implementing that new idea and so forth. So with creative problem solving, if we take whole brain thinking to superimpose it over this whole brain thinking concept or model, then you'll have a better way of making decisions. So essentially, I would just like to talk a little bit about what creative styles are, what this model intakes. It was developed by Ned Herman about 30 years ago when he was the education training manager at GE. And he realized how important it was to assess various thinking styles for effective productivity. So I'll briefly go over what the styles are, what the metaphors for those styles are. I'll talk about creativity methods for understanding different entrepreneurial opportunities that you can utilize if you implement these particular strategies or this model. And then just kind of how the entrepreneurial leader can utilize this strategy and help to build an effective team and outcomes. And just kind of go over a little bit about how, maybe technological developments have been instrumental in helping people become more whole brain thinkers. And maybe the success that has been driven by that process.
Sure. Now, could you also explain the thinking quadrants in brief?
Oh yes, the different quadrants you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. So quadrant, firstly, if we think about our brain, we kind of think that it's only either left brain thinking or right brain thinking or cerebral or limbic. So we never necessarily put it in 4 quadrants. So the way the model was designed by Herman, the Herman group, and that's HERRMANN, was that he designed it such that there were 4 quadrants where A, B, C, D are identified metaphorically as in quadrant A, which is the upper left-hand corner of your brain. You're more analytical and logical and rational in your thinking. And quadrant B, which is the lower left, again, this is limbic, but it's on the left-hand side of your brain, is where you're more organized and you kind of like to be in control and look at metrics and outcomes and planning. And then quadrant C, which is the lower right-hand corner of the brain, is where that's the limbic aspect, but it's also where your emotions are predominant and you care about people's feelings and their value system, and it's more personalized for you. And then quadrant D is where more entrepreneurs think, because they're more aligned with kind of what can be, what's the future. It's like being a visionary in a sense. And so if we were to take all 4 quadrants, that's considered as using the whole brain. But obviously we all have a predominant way of thinking and making decisions, and even in leadership styles. So that would kind of influence how we decide something.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, how does knowing your dominant thinking style affect how you solve a problem as an entrepreneur?
Basically, it's important to recognize what your preferences are. And so the Herman model uses these kind of quick questions to see what drives you crazy in communicating or what annoys you about people. And wherever you have more selections in that particular quadrant, that tends to identify who you are as a thinker, in particular for your whole brain or your preferred thinking style. It doesn't mean you necessarily can't use the other parts of your brain, but it's your preferred thinking style. So generally for an entrepreneur, in order to solve problems, it's essential that they recognize that they, may fall into the D quadrant for the most part because they're visionary, they like ideas, they like to be all over the place with all these wild thoughts and processes. But it's important to understand that you're trying to create or enhance or make something better and different for the person who's in the C quadrant. So you want to understand your customer, your client, your end user. So having a thinking style that may be more D, looking at quadrant C helps you to kind of focus in on how you would make your decisions in trying to solve a problem. And then it's important to also use the data. So doing the analytics to see what the trends are telling you about a particular market or the industry or the focus of your idea. So quadrant A will help that leader, that entrepreneur, think about calculations and quantifications of things that are essential to make a decision. And then quadrant B would be where they would have to plan out how they're going to implement their strategy to accomplish that idea that they may have. So if your dominant style as an entrepreneur falls into one of the other quadrants or a quadrant that you don't expect, it's imperative to understand how to make those things work for you as an entrepreneur, or to hire people or work collaboratively with someone who has an opposite direction thinking style as your own. So as an entrepreneur, you obviously want to understand what your brain is saying about you and how you prefer to decide on something.
Okay, good. And since we're talking about entrepreneurship, I think we should also talk about how understanding each team member's thinking preferences within a company or a startup. How does like the thinking preferences of each team member enhance problem solving in a team?
I think it's imperative to know to have diverse thinking because it improves. If you respect the other person's thought process and their thinking preference, then it brings more value to each other's thinking. It helps you see things in a different way. So you have this diversification of thoughts and ideas that you may not otherwise get because you have a preferred way of seeing things or a predominant way of seeing things and making decisions. So if you have a team of individuals who are distinct from your own, then you want to embrace them and their ideas so that you can talk out how each other can enhance the overall process and have a mutual outcome that benefits everybody on the team.
And how can this improve communication strategies in a team?
Yeah, so, and that's one of the most important things about whole brain thinking. Being part of a team of individuals who have different thinking preferences, you may want to communicate with them based on their preferred style of thinking as opposed to your own, because that way you influence them to be able to speak as to what will, improve some outcome. So you want to communicate on their basis of, what their preferred style is. I think that helps build a rapport, and you feel comfortable talking to that and reciprocating the conversation with that individual if you understand how they think. But it really takes some work. It's sometimes we, especially as entrepreneurs, hold on to what we believe because that's the best way. But if you're effective entrepreneur, you use some leadership skills and knowledge, you can enhance that communication process.
Okay, got it. Now, I think the audience will really understand this better if you could provide examples of leaders who have successfully applied thinking preferences to their teams towards innovative solutions?
In particular, I would say, well, we can just go back to where Ned Herman utilized it at GE, and the training processes that they used helped them to understand that people were more productive when they started using whole brain thinking. Because in general, you work with people who are more, maybe productivity based or engineering based, or maybe accounting, different areas of their organization. Well, by taking on an understanding of what it means to think holistically, you enhance your ability to make the organization better. I think another example I could speak to that I learned about that the whole brain thinking model has been used was with Microsoft, and they were using it for developing the Xbox 360, and they were focusing on the customer's preferences. And they realized by using whole brain thinking that that particular feature in that particular gaming console was more popular than all the other ones, because they got into the mindsets and desires of those customers, those end users. The other example I think I can recall from some research, and it was early on, well, maybe not that early on, it's probably within the last few years. Telecom, which is a New Zealand company, they had some problems with the call center. They had, how some companies are repetitive in their communication with customer service. And so the customers were not very happy about that. And so they looked into how they can improve it and started implementing a whole brain thinking training program for the call center representatives. And so that was a way to get a sense of what the customers needed and how they received the communication from those individuals. And so I think it was like $1 or something per investment, and the return on and they call it a return on intelligence, like return on investment, was about a $12 return for each dollar invested. So that was a really good example, I thought. And a lot of companies are using it, like Pfizer, AT&T, some of the larger organizations, I think 3M. And then it's also being used at MIT, which is a university, and they're educating a lot of engineers and so forth, but they recognize engineers have a quadrant A focus. But they had to learn that, if you want to do business with these ideas you have, you want to learn how to incorporate some knowledge about, the future, being visionary, being strategic in your planning, and understanding what the outcomes will do for a client or a customer.
Okay, since you mentioned MIT, I would like to take this to the educational side, and how educational practitioners can use whole brain thinking methods to better prepare the students for today's workforce.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. Well, in particular, because that's an area that I'm very familiar with, although it's a kind of a new transition in my life. I believe that if you prepare individuals, learners, whether they're post-transitioner learners or if they're, just starting undergrad, I think if you incorporate an understanding of values, like who they are, what are your interests, what are your values, what are your skills and abilities and knowledge, and how can you take your education to utilize it as a contributor to an organization, or if you want to go further in your education. And so the way I look at it, I have people identify something what I call is a personal strategy or personal mission statement. And so in that way, they can determine, what values they possess, what is important for them. And then from there, they can assess what their preferred ways of solving problems are. And usually they find that they're more, more or less quantitative or more personalized. And in that sense, they can assess how they can decide what their career endeavors would be. because nobody's happy if they're just put into a position just because someone says, well, your personality dictates that you should be in this particular career. Well, if they assess their preferred thinking styles as opposed to, a personality test or something, or even their skill base, because people can always develop different skills and knowledge and education. If they understand how they make decisions, they'll have a way of assessing how to be creative in deciding where they want to go in their careers. So I believe it's important to start with maybe doing something like a personalized SWOT. Like, what are your strengths? What are some things you want to improve upon? What do you want to learn? And how can you take those particular strengths and improvements in your life to seize upon some opportunities that are available to you? Because trends come and go, and but if you think differently about deciding something, you can always adjust. So creative problem solving and whole brain thinking will help a person in deciding where they want to go in their careers.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think the young audiences will greatly benefit from this. Now,
Yeah, I always believe in doing like a portfolio of sorts. So starting with a personal strategy, a personal mission, and then building from there. Resumes don't have to be the first thing you do. Just identify your career endeavors as a personal mission.
okay, great. And if you could go in this in a little bit more depth and explain to students how they can do this, as in
Oh,
what tools and strategies they could use, how they can apply this whole brain thinking, so that, if our audience member, a young audience member is listening to this, maybe he can start their journey from now.
absolutely. Yeah. So again, people may not be familiar with using kind of this approach to strategy. So it's like a strategic way of looking at your life. So, and I mentioned the portfolio. So a personalized portfolio is a way to start capturing what who you are. Start with who you are, maybe like a background, kind of a bio. How we have to have people write a bio, like their past experiences and things like that. Well, a personal bio can start for a younger learner by looking at how they were reared, what was the nature of their growth, and when did it change? Maybe it was pre-high school. And once they got to high school, and socialization processes may dictate some other way of thinking, because our values change as we mature. So the way we look at, and this is kind of a little bit of a spin on our discussion here, but experiential learning is part of what we do to help people build on their career and their educational outcomes. So if, for instance, you did some things as a child that kind of influenced what you decided to do when you got high school. But maybe by the time you got to college, you realized you had a different set of interests because you were maturing. So what we do in experiential learning is reflection. This is like journalizing. So part of this portfolio that I'm speaking about would entail, starting with the personal mission, like what do you hope to do based on your interests, your values, your skills, your knowledge, and where would you like to go with that? So it's almost like a vision statement too, and you can interject those. And then from there, you start talking about experiences you've had. Maybe you never really had a job, that you've had some kind of work you've done that has been instrumental in your growth and your knowledge and understanding. And so those things become part of this portfolio. And if you have worked, maybe if it's part-time, or maybe you just babysit or mowed the lawn or something, but that's part of putting together a profile of you, who you are, and how you can build from that. So reflection just means you want to capture what you do based on those experiences, looking at your personal strategy statement or personal mission statement, whatever you want to call it, and continue to reflect, because writing will, when you see what you've written and you look at what you've accomplished, it helps you build yourself up even more. And then this thing about whole brain thinking may be shared with somebody who has a different set of knowledge and abilities and skills and decision-making processes that can critique you. or mentor each other, reciprocate those kinds of things. And I think building that portfolio is essential, and you can help build a profile for yourself going forth in maybe like a LinkedIn setting.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, an important topic I would like to touch upon, which is emotional intelligence, and how much of an important role in conjunction with the whole brain thinking does it play, particularly in leadership and entrepreneurial contexts?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I use EQ as an abbreviation for emotional intelligence. Very important for us, for everybody individually. We want, when we have interactions with each other, we want to be aware of ourselves and not to have a self-focus as to being arrogant, but aware of how we're managing ourselves when we communicate and interact, because that enhances our relationship and how we manage relationships. So going forth in as an entrepreneurial endeavor or in leadership aspect, you want to be keen on how you utilize emotional intelligence, because as a quadrant C individual, they're expecting you to care about what they're anticipating from you. And so the quadrant C, which is the lower right, it's the limbic as well as the right brain, where all the emotions take place. So artistically and creatively, you want to be able to take the knowledge about how to manage yourself and how to be attuned to what the needs are of your target individual, and how to be aware of the situation. Just like situational leadership, you want to take into account how you affect that person and how you influence them, and hopefully in a positive way, or at least get some response to them as to how you can improve that particular interaction as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as someone who's trying to create value for you.
Okay, got it. Now, let's talk about technology and digital tools and how they can impact whole brain thinking in education, professional development, as well as entrepreneurship.
So obviously we're totally dependent upon technology, right? Can't get around it. It's very good. It's good when it's working. It's horrible if we have a crash or something.
Right.
But we're totally dependent upon technology and digital tools. And I'm really encouraged by the number of tools that are available for helping people to grow and enhance their knowledge about ways of behaving, looking at themselves, assessing themselves. And I think in particular, I think it helps you to look at scenarios and ways of, maybe you can do it individually or as a team, but looking at different components of how you can incorporate whole brain thinking. Say, for instance, you need to do some analyses for financial or budgeting, investing. So you want to use your quadrant A to be able to look at things like that. So there are different tools for analyzing, data and so forth. And then for quadrant B, you want to be able to strategize how to strategically incorporate and organize your data so that it's clear and concise, and that it does not, affect the data that had been generated. And then to be able to communicate that effectively to people you need to share the data with, for whom you're trying to create some new idea or new process or some unique way of doing things. And obviously to be able to visualize the futuristic components thereof. So some of the tools that I use and that I have, and I hope it's okay that I can utilize certain individual companies without any issues. But I am a certified partner with CAPSIM Simulation, and CAPSIM Simulation does, it looks at teamwork, and it helps learners be able to make decisions with regard to creating new products, developing new products, analyzing and looking at marketing strategies, and being able to produce them and look at what the human resource influences are in making effective outcomes. And I think there's another one called Be Leader, which is a virtual leadership training that allows you to work individually to see how you would communicate in a setting, one-on-one, or with two people in the room, or with a room of executives up to maybe 7 or 8 people. And so you're the person who sits there and decides how you interact with them, but you want to be able to effectively influence the outcomes without, being opposition or resistant to what they're trying to accomplish, but you want to be collaborative. So there are different tools that are available for being trained and getting experiential learning in using artificial intelligence. So I'm very excited about that because it looks like the market is continually growing in that area.
That's right. Now,
Yes.
could you share any personal experiences where WholeBrain thinking has played a pivotal role in overcoming a complex problem or maybe achieving a significant milestone in your journey?
Wow. Yeah. So I've had several different milestones, and the journey has been a little, rough here and there. Had to overcome a lot of obstacles. I think the one I could speak to that may be more relevant for now, where I was able to use whole brain thinking, was probably the transition that I recently made, retiring from being a professor who taught so many different topics, and unfortunately, sometimes being an expert in too many areas is not a good thing, right? It can be overwhelming. So yeah, so I had to assess, what is the best thing for me, with regard to, ensuring mental health, as well as how I can create value utilizing my credentials and expertise to help others who may have been in a situation as myself. So I assessed that by looking at myself as an adult learner, because when I went to school later in life, I went straight through a bachelor degree, but when I went for my master's, I had already gotten like 9 years of experience. So I thought that if I could think through how to help a person who's a mid-career transitioner or someone who's a post-transition education seeker, someone who's looking to advance in their education, or and most recently thinking about military members and veterans. So, analyzing what this meant and what this could mean for somebody else to understand how, what is this process? What do the data say? So the data say that there are several people looking for success coaches, several people looking for how to navigate advancing their careers, looking for ways to be counseled, because you may not necessarily get that within the educational realm. So anyway, I considered that, and then I considered how to get through that particular area for myself. So I had to plan it out. So that was quadrant A. And then quadrant B is the strategic way of looking at when do I decide that I need to retire. So I had to look, process the number of months wherein I could live comfortably, and then implement the appropriate time. But at the same time, I'm writing a business plan, and I'm looking at how I could still be sane, right? But then I wanted to, based on the data of, military members and veterans, post-secondary education individuals looking for ways to be counseled and advised, and career transitioners who may not get the service that they require within their organization. I thought that would be my use of quadrant C. So I met with and talked to several past students, former students and learners that I'd had, to get their feedback as to how I could incorporate my training, my knowledge, my credentials to be of service to others. And then so, illumination, or, so the creative solving process was obviously illumination when I realized, yeah, I could do it. So that's quadrant D, helping me realize that, yes, you can probably do this entrepreneurial journey. It may take, a year and a half or two, but I think ultimately it was worth my being able to utilize things that I had taught, because teaching and doing it are different. So it's a learning experience, and I feel like learning, it's always important to keep learning.
Right.
So, and that's what I believe in.
All right. Thank you so much, Sherry, for taking the time to join us today and sharing these valuable insights.
Of course, Nakul. I totally enjoyed it, and thank you so much for inviting me.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope that you found this podcast informative and insightful. Once again, thank you, Sherry.
Thank you. Have a good evening.